Hello readers, I'm Bonnie Henry with the Arizona Daily Star. First of all, of course, it's a story that hasn't been told before. I'm not interested in doing a story that somebody else has written about, say, 6 months earlier. I'm always looking for the human interest angle. What's interesting about this story? I get a lot of people, because I write a lot of stories about older folks, and I get a lot of people wanting me to come out and do Grandma's 100th birthday. And that's wonderful, but Grandma has to have done something really unique in her lifetime. She can't just be the same wonderful mother doing the normal thing. So if she's got a real story to tell, maybe she ran a house of ill repute in the 30s or something like that. That gets my attention, that sort of thing. It's not fair, but that's the sort of thing I would do. Anything to do with local history, I'm very interested in. And that's something I just sort of fell into, really. I'm a native Tucsonan, grew up here, but really didn't know much about my own hometown. And I was asked to write a second column a week. I've been writing my weekly column for about a year, and I was asked to do a second column a week. And so we decided we'd do a little local history. And so my first story I did was something I remembered, which was the old Wetmore Pool out east of the Tucson Mall. And I'd gone there as a kid. And it just resonated with the readers right away. So we knew we had a winner there. So anything that has to do with local history, it borders on the nostalgia, but people love that. People love to remember the places where they went as young people, especially places where they had a good time. So I think I've done just about every dance hall and swimming pool and some bars and what have you in town. So that's been a lot of fun for me. The nostalgia, the human interest, something that evokes either pity or humor, anything that evokes all the human emotions, that people can identify with this person I'm writing about or with their story. Well, as most people know, I was born here in Tucson, St. Mary's Hospital, grew up here. I was part of the baby boom generation, and Tucson saw such a tremendous growth after World War II, and I was part of that. And I myself have seen the city grow so much and change so much over the years that it's kind of fun to write those kind of stories. I don't think another Tucson, the columns I wrote, would be possible in a city, for instance, such as Boston, which has stayed the same for many, many years. But Tucson has changed so much just in my lifetime. I have old-timers telling me how there was a cattle guard on Wilmot Road, and you had to get out of your car and open up the cattle guard to go down Wilmot Road. And that's not, you know, like 100 years ago. That's like maybe 50 or 60 years ago at most. So those kinds of things, it's sort of a gee whiz factor. And I love doing that. The toughest thing for me is for my Sunday humor column, because that is straight off the top of my head. And sometimes I'm very, very lucky because things will just happen to me that I know I can make a column out of. For instance, when I went to renew my driver's license and I staggered out of there 2.5 hours later. And what went on? I knew I had a column. It's sort of the making lemonade out of lemons thing, and I knew that would resonate with readers, and it did. So anything like that, the supermarkets are great places for me to find fodder, that sort of thing, because everybody goes to the supermarket, and you can always find some humor there. For instance, when supermarkets quit selling food, and now you go to a supermarket to get your flu shots and to buy pottery and everything else, and where's the food in the supermarket, that sort of thing. As far as my profiles, the stories, the people stories that I do, I don't have a problem much anymore. When I first started, I was haunting the swap meets and the craft fairs and even going to the laundromats and looking up at the little notices on the bulletin board for people who were doing unusual things. But I'm established enough now that people call me. And that's wonderful because I get just a lot of more story ideas than I can use, which is great. And the funny thing is that very few of these people who are calling me are saying, hey, write a story about me. They're usually calling about their neighbor down the street or a friend or even somebody they've just heard about. And so that's great too, and it makes it a little more genuine that way. What are we in, the almost the last week of January, and I'd say I've got stories that they're not all written, but I have stories up until probably 1st of April to do. I've always wanted that. I would be absolutely panicky if I didn't know what next week's column would be. I know some columnists and reporters, they thrive on that, and I don't. And sometimes that can be a disadvantage because sometimes my things are not as timely as they should be. But then again, I don't usually deal in timely things too much. Now with Valentine's coming, for instance, I've got a lot of Valentine's stories, that sort of thing. But I would hope most of my stories are what we call evergreen. Back in the 1930s, we had a young lady in this town by the name of June Robles. And her grandfather had Robles Ranch out where we still call it Robles Junction or 3 Points. A very prominent family. And June was kidnapped. And of course this was during the 30s where everybody was deathly afraid of kidnappings after the Lindbergh affair. And June was kidnapped. And for about 3 days or so, I'm not real sure about all the details now, they're a little hazy to me now. But I wanted to do a story on that. And at the time, June Robles was still alive and lived in Tucson. I don't know what her status is now. And I actually called her on the phone and just got a clipped no response from her. And just the vibes I was getting from other people, and finally an editor said, don't do it, because there were still family members around, and the feeling was that it might, and again, I have no idea on this, but there was a feeling that allegedly it might have been an inside job. And so the family did not want to be embarrassed that way, and the family never pursued it themselves as far as seeking out a criminal or having a criminal trial. And I actually went back into our library and found an old story that we were going to publish. It was set up for everything. It had the headline, it had everything, and it never ran. And this was a reporter, this story probably was 20 years earlier. So for whatever reason, they'd gotten the kibosh on that then, and that was still the case with me. So I have not done the June Robles kidnapping, even though it was sensational here in this town at the time. Freeways. A few years ago, I wrote a column about how we needed a crosstown freeway. That I was sick and tired of all the traffic in Tucson and how we were the biggest city in the country without a crosstown freeway. And I really expected a deluge of negative response from the not in my backyard people. And I was amazed. I got maybe 5 or 6 responses like that, and I got well over 100 responses favoring my column and saying, yes, it's about time. So freeways, anytime you write about traffic in this town, you are going to get a response. That's for sure. I will also say early in my career, I did a story that was negative of our winter visitors, or snowbirds as I call them. And it was just a lighthearted column. It was nothing really derogatory. And the thing that made them the maddest was when I mentioned their polyester checkered pants that they wore. This was back in the 80s when it seemed like everybody wore checkered polyester pants. And that really upset them. One lady wrote to me and said, oh, pretty soon we're going to have a section in the restaurants, polyester checkered pants only. And I laughed. I thought, gee, I wish I had thought of that. And that really upset me. And what was really funny was about a week later, we had a picture in the paper of our own mayor, Lou Murphy. And guess what he was wearing? Of course, checkered polyester pants. I don't think so. The 2 books we've done were great labors of love and just wonderful to do, and there are no repeats in either book. They're all my old history of Tucson columns. But it's not so much gathering the stories again. It's the photos. Those, especially with the second book, it was really tough because some of those columns in the second book, even though it's a newer book, some of those columns still went back to the late 1980s. And back then, we didn't save photos the way we do now. We would borrow a family photo from somebody, and we would run it in the paper for the story, and then return it to the family. We never made a copy or anything. So it was really, really tough to get those photos back. It was really quite hard. So I never say never, but at this point I don't see it. I think it would be fun, and this would of course be totally up to the star, to put together a book of my humor columns, because I've done a lot of those, of course. I mean, those stretch over almost 25 years, and those wouldn't be so tough to do. I wouldn't have to recontact people and see how things had changed, if the person I wrote about was still alive, or if the building I wrote about, what had happened to it in the meantime. And I wouldn't have to worry about photos, because none of those ran with photos. So I think that would be fun if we came out with just, a humor book of some of the best of Bonnie, or whatever you wanted to call it. But again, nobody's approached me with that.
I'll drop that bug in somebody's ear.
It is a great privilege to work here at the Star, and I appreciate all the freedom I get to. I more or less get to do just about anything I want to. There's been very little censorship or steering me away from a certain topic, and I'm especially grateful to all the readers out there who provide me with all these wonderful stories that I've been able to tell.